Hello, my name is Jennifer Hale. Thank you for tapping the screen. Thank you so much. We now have 342 likes. Continue to tap the screen so that we can get the likes up. Thank you so much. So we have been for the last 2 weeks and will continue through the month of March working on March Madness with getting rid of scraps. Our goal is to get rid of as many scraps as we possibly can. And we've been making little projects with them. I have been recommending patterns to you. Thank you so much for the follow. I have been recommending patterns to you. Hey, Auntie, Aunt Nell, Aunt Net. Oh Lord, I gotta be able to read. Hi, Aunt Net. So I'm telling you, I'm delirious on Friday. So I've been trying to come up with projects that I could share that really look nice, but are using a lot of scraps up. I make Ankara dresses for the most part, or skirts, and so I use these fabrics to make the skirts or the dresses. And then these are the pieces that are left over. Traditionally, some people will throw away scraps. Some people will leave them in a pile and will never use them. So this is a way of using those up so that, hey, this becomes another piece of fabric that you're using rather than going out and buying additional yardage. So for this particular one, this is a pattern. It was a free pattern by Kena Quilt Studio. And this was applique. So last Saturday, we went over how to cut the applique out, the materials you would need for that. I did the stitching offline, even though I had a video where I showed you how to stitch around the applique. But I then also added the border. I did a video on that. So this is just a series of squares. I started off with 2.5-inch strips. I pieced all of those together, and then I subcut those into 2x2 squares, and then attached them to another 2x2 until I had a row going all the way across for this, and I bordered the whole entire thing. So I knew it was coming. Whew. Okay, so I knew that this could be anything that I wanted it to be. I could continue to border this, and I could add another border and another border and another border, and eventually end up with a table mat. I could have a small mini quilt. I could have, thank you so much. I could have a mini quilt. I could do a ton of things. You can even think outside the box. This could be any applique. So I just chose to go with this one. It is appropriate, I thought, ending African American History Month and also celebrating Women's History Month. So it was a nice segue into it. So this could be any type of figure or anything that you wanted it to be. What we did talk about is that you could use like a coloring page, a child's coloring page. So if you're making something for a child, and it is a character from your favorite theme park or from your favorite TV show, you could get an outline, a coloring page, and then do the same thing with that to create a piece that you could put in the center of this and create different blocks. So you could have a whole theme park of blocks of those different characters or TV show. Or you could have one central block, make it big enough, and create a quilt out of it. You could make a bag out of this. So you could imagine this as being the front of your tote bag. Now, me personally, I wouldn't use a white background if I did that, just because white gets dirty. But you could do that as well. So those are just some of the ideas that I came up with. I'm going to do a pillow cover. So that's what this is going to end up being, but you could make this anything that you want. And the reason I like it as a pillow cover is I'll make a pillow later. And when I make the pillow form, I actually sew up all the edges and I stuff it with my scrap fabric. So if you weren't here before, all of my scrap fabric, I shred it with my rotary cutter. So it looks like this. And once it's all shredded up, then I use that as a stuffing for my pillow form. So it doesn't cost me anything for the most part when I'm making something scrappy that looks absolutely adorable for a gift for somebody. It doesn't cost me any money because I already have everything in my stash. You could do the same thing with scraps of clothes. Me personally, I might cut out particular parts of the clothes just because they may, you know, if you have a shirt right under here, under the arm, it's possible that somebody was sweating a lot, and over time, that odor might come back if people don't wash their clothes the way they should, right? So you just cut a big hole around that, and then you throw that part away and use the rest of the shirt. But, you know, for the most part, you could shred up old shirts. You could shred up clothes that you put a hole in or that you wore out. You could use that any way that you wanted to get all of those scraps together. You do need a lot of strips if you want a full pillow, but you can absolutely make the pillow form. I say pillow form because sometimes I like to change these out. So I don't want to make a pillow out of this. And then every time I'm finished with this one, let's say it's a holiday quilt, when I'm finished with it, I have to put it away as the whole pillow unit. If I make a pillow cover, then I can just remove this one, put it away, get the next one, let's say moving from Valentine's Day to right now we're coming into St. Patty's Day. And so I could have had a heart in the center of this one. And then for St. Patty's Day, I could have had the floor leaf clover. So this pattern basically just gave me this in the center. And this was called Garden Window, and it was by Kena Quilt Studio, Kena Quilt Studio, and it was a free pattern that you could get if you signed up for her newsletter. These I created on my own. So I knew what I wanted to border this out, and I decided how I wanted to border it out. She actually does something a little bit differently for her finished look, so it's totally up to you, you know, like you're doing a little bit of creating to get whatever you want the final look to look like. So for me, this was enough, but you could absolutely make this wider or do anything else that you want to do with it, okay? Not a problem. So I have here my trusty dusty Husqvarna Viking. This is just the brand that I use. I am demonstrating from beginning to end some of the projects that I'm working on because not everybody has a long arm machine. And if everybody doesn't have a long arm, you don't want to get stopped in the process of doing something like so many of my quilt tops, because you have to figure out how to get your items quilted. You can do them on a domestic. There are some challenges to doing it on a domestic, but it can absolutely be done on a domestic. So you need to make sure that you have certain tools to get that done. There are things that are going to make your life easier, but aren't necessarily 100% needed, okay? So for example, I'll take this off for a second, place that in my lap. I have a table here, and this is an extension table. What this does is it extends my work area level with the throat plate out this way. That means that when I am quilting and or sewing, because I could use it for sewing, I can lay my hands level on both sides to guide my fabric. So instead of just using one hand and possibly holding my fabric with the other hand, which is how we typically sew a lot of times, like this, I now can hold my hands like this and just guide the fabric, because you're not doing a lot of pushing anyway. If you're just sewing, you're just guiding it so it stays straight, so it doesn't go like this while you're sewing. You're guiding it this way, and there are feed dogs that are underneath that are pulling the fabric as you go. So the table helps for ease. So that's just something that I use. This is a Sew Steady table, and I bought this one from Sewing Parts Online. I did have 2 other tables because they are different, believe it or not. Sewing machine manufacturers don't make it easy for you. So this throat bed right here is different from the throat bed for this machine here, which is different for the throat bed for the machine that's downstairs, and they're all Husqvarna Vikings. So this is Ruby down here, this is Opal, and downstairs is Emerald, and they all have different throat beds. So I had to buy 3 different tables, and yeah, it is what it is, but I pay for comfort. So there are some things that I like to do for comfort. Another thing that we have is there is what is called a free motion foot. It could be called a jumper foot, or it could be called a spring foot because there's a little spring right here. And what this does is it allows you to move freely over your fabric. It holds it in place by lowering this foot to have the fabric where it needs to be while the needle goes in, and then it pops back up. And it does that throughout so that you can do your stitches while you are quilting the piece that you're working on. That's what I'm going to use today, so we'll show you that today. With some of the techniques that I'm going to do. I am by no means an expert with this. I just love to do this. I love the practice. I love to try, which is another reason why I love to do scrap projects, because I don't care what they come out looking like, because it's a scrap project. It was a waste of my time at most, if somebody wants to say that, but it wasn't like I bought materials and wasted materials. So this is a great opportunity to practice all those things that you wanted to practice. My feed dogs under here are lowered. There is a little button for me in the front of this machine that I push that helps me to lower the feed dogs. On my Emerald, same place here, but it's on the back, and I use that to lower the feed dogs. The feed dogs are right here. There are these teeth that are here. They help to move your fabric from the front to the back. So they're lowered right now, which means they're lower than the plate, so they will not come into play at all. So if I stitch, that fabric is not moving. If I have a regular foot on there, it's going to sit there until I move it. Depending on the pressure that you have from this part of your machine, it's not going to move unless I release some of the pressure. That's a story for a different day. But just so you know, there is some pressure that goes here that will keep that from moving, and you have to relieve it if you're using, let's say, like a ruler foot, because a ruler foot sits down the whole time, and then you're using rulers to do your while you're doing your quilting. So you could use your walking foot, you could use your foot that looks like this, your spring foot, or what we call the free motion foot. And then there is another foot that looks like this. This one is closed, but this is another foot that I could use, and it's usually called the ruler foot, and I'm not using this today. But what this does is it'll be flush with your ruler, and then it will help you because you can lay it down on your quilt. And then as I'm stitching a straight line, this kind of ensures that it won't move as I stitch, because I want as straight of a line as possible. Then I will place my ruler on that straight line that I just stitched, and I can stitch another straight line. I'll move it all around, of course, and then I'll put the ruler there, another straight line. So it guarantees that my lines could be as straight as possible. Okay, so I could use the ruler, and there are special rulers that you have to buy. So if you're buying them, you have to let people know what kind of machine you have and they will tell you whether they sell the ruler or what kind of rule you need. So this is for a low shank machine, which is this machine, and it also means that I have to have this type of foot to go with it. So as long as I have the materials that I need to do what I need to do, I can do just about anything. So I left white in there because that's what it was in there from yesterday. And I want to do something all in this area. I also want to do something in this area with the hair, but it's not going to be white because then I would have gray hair. So I need to decide where I want to start and what I want to quilt. I may want to do something with her face, or I could leave her face alone. This is your quilt and this is how you're doing it. I will say that whatever design you decide to do for her face, if you decide, you know, just to outline it, you could outline it. And her face here isn't that big. But this big area here, I may want to quilt. So I could leave this alone, or I could just do lines. I could do squigglies. I could do anything I wanted in her facial area. So you kind of want to plan out what it looks like before you start your quilting. So once you have your ideas in place, then it's time to start. And I'm going to take this one out. Okay. And we're not going to talk about how I just took that thread out. And I do want to start in the black area. So I'm going to start with her hair. I prefer for most things to start in the center and work my way out. If I start in the center and work my way out, if there are any bubbles, I can try to push those bubbles out to the edges rather than stitching all around the edge, coming in the center, and then there are unforeseen bubbles that I wasn't expecting. Because sometimes no matter how much you put down your spray base, sometimes in the quilting of an item, it's temporary, it's not permanent. So sometimes it'll lift, it'll shift, and then it just causes you some undue stress that you don't want to have when you're doing this. Okay. I'm going to, thank you for tapping the screen. We are at 1.2K. I'm going to lower my needle. That's my machine acting like that. And it's going to pull my bobbin thread up. And let me slide this in just a little bit. Woo, that neck just loves to make extra noise. And let me slide that down. And I just need to adjust a couple things to get this to do what I need it to do. I think that will work. It's not going to do what I need it to do, but I'll figure it out. Okay. So I have my bobbin thread that has come up, and I have my top thread. If my tensions are right, I should not see my bottom thread. So a lot of times, like in embroidery and in quilting, if you're not going to see the thread, it doesn't matter what the thread is on the bottom. This, of course, will make a liar out of me today, and it will show it. It's easier for me to quilt with some sort of apparatus that will keep my hands from shifting all over the fabric. So I do like to use gloves. These are quilting gloves. Yesterday, when I did the quilting, and you can see the little dots, right? Those are grips. Yesterday, I used these gloves, and these are garden gloves. So these are probably $1 in the Dollar Tree. These are more than that at Joann's. So I already had 2 pair. I got them when they were on sale. It is what it is because I thought I had to have them until I found out about the Dollar Tree. Okay. So, whoops. How did I not lower the foot? Okay. I will do a couple stitches in place and notice that even if I lift my hands up, that fabric doesn't move. Again, because those feed dogs are lowered, so it doesn't move my fabric until I move my fabric. So these two are up top. I will cut those off later, but I'm kind of knotting this in place. That's why I did a couple stitches, so that when I cut it, it won't unravel on me and then mess up the stitching. Because she has, and this tension is not doing what I want it to do. Okay, let me see. I may have to switch to black. Did that do it? Yeah, that did it. Okay. So all I'm doing is relieving the tension of my top thread. Some of this I'm not worried about because it'll ease itself out. But if it keeps dotting on me, I'm going to change it to black. And I think I'll change it. I'll change this out. Because if I'm going to do it right, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it right. And I keep my threads here. Okay, so I'm going to pull this out for a second. Hey, Miss Janine. And I will clip this from the bottom here as well. My stitches for quilting aren't really close together, so because they're not really close together, I should be able to kind of pop those out. But I'll show you what happened just so you can see. You see how the white is pulling through? So even as I am adjusting my tension, it's not doing what I need it to do. I'm not worried if it shows up on the back because this is going to be a pillow case cover, and so the back of it nobody's going to see anyway. It's going to be enclosed in the pillow cover. So I'm not worried about that, but I am worried about the front. And if it didn't look so tacky, I would leave it as is. If it didn't look like little dots, or if it blended better than it did with the black fabric. I wouldn't be as worried about it, but because my tensions are acting funky and I really don't feel like adjusting them, yeah, I'll just change the thread out. And it's because I clearly didn't decide to go, because that would have been not smart on my part. But I didn't go all the way around the fabric piece. It's not taking me that long just to, seam rip that out. Because I said, let me just try it a little bit, see what happens. And then if it doesn't work the way I need it to, I can change the black out. And we'll show you at the end what that looks like, just so that you can see it. But again, you will only see it on the top. You won't see it from the bottom. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We are at 2.1K. Just continue to tap that screen for me. I appreciate you. Again, Dr. Jennifer Hill. I am a quilter. I love to quilt. I do sew, contrary to what a lot of people think. I started off as a sewist. I was sewing at a very young, tender age with my grandmother. I would go over to her house, and we had a routine. I am very much what we like to call a girly girl. And so I would sit down after doing my homework, or, sometimes I didn't do my homework, but I would sit down with my grandmother. We would get dinner together. Once dinner was together, dishes were washed, we would clear the dining room table and proceed to sew. She had a sewing class across the street at the community center, and I would go over there on Thursdays, and I would actually sew with her on Thursdays. So we learned how to make clothing, pants, dresses, whatever it was. And my grandmother, if there was something that she didn't know how to do, there were other seamstress that were there that could help her with that. So it was really a great time to, learn how to sew at a young age, sit with my grandmother, and, I enjoyed it. I continued to sew all through college. I took my machine to college. I don't really do a lot of sewing for other people. I did on occasion make something, and then I got into crafts. So I made pillows for people and other little crafts. That's what I worked on when I was in college. After college was over, I continued to do some sewing. And then, I kind of stopped. I did a couple projects here and there, but for the most part, didn't really pick up sewing regularly until I got into quilting. And that was about in 2002 that I started quilting, and I just have been doing it ever since until I did my dissertation for ergo the name Dr. Jen. And when I started that in 2018, I did take a break from quilting just because it was a lot trying to do that 50 million page paper that I had to do. So my machine is not reversed. My machine is just reversed on camera. So it is like most machines, it is facing in the direction that most people would have their machines in. It's just that it looks backwards because I didn't do the mirror for this live. So it's still in the other direction. So no, ma'am. Look, you are. I mean, look, silly isn't even the word, because I don't know how you were quilting during your dissertation, but I get it because it was part of your dissertation, which is absolutely fabulous because I couldn't do it. I was so stressed. I had to read and do everything else, and I absolutely would have been quilting and talking and doing everything else besides quilting. It's not a problem. Okay, so we're going to try it again. And this time, I should be able to do this. And I'm just doing swirls. And again, I have a long arm. But it's important to just come back and share because my roots started with a domestic. So this is absolutely a domestic machine. And I wanted to make sure that I was domestic friendly. And I wanted to make sure that whatever I did was not something that looked so impossible that you couldn't do it. So getting started with this, all I'm doing is just kind of making swirls similar to her hair. I just really want to quilt this down. The only reason why I'm not doing it, Miss Wilkins, is just because I was doing some beginner work and I didn't, and for people that don't have Berninas, just like, when I first started, I wanted to be able to share how they could do it with their domestic. Plus, I spend all this money. So from time to time, I do pull it out. I do find that, like, in practicing, and this is what this is practice, and it's scrappy, it gives me a chance to kind of get used to moving my hands again and not feeling intimidated by the big machine. So that's really the only reason why I'm still using it. Oh, wow. Go ahead, Heather. You have the Q20. Okay. So yes, I'm still learning how to use the Bernina. I did actually quilt a quilt on it. So, and I have 2 more that I have set up and ready to go. But I did think that, you know, like I said, I have folks that are like, I don't want to quilt. It's too difficult. What? It costs how much to have somebody do the quilting for you? And especially when you're not confident in your quilting, you don't necessarily, you don't necessarily want, and I'll just take it from my non-confidence, I didn't want to pay somebody a whole lot of money to do my quilting, and I didn't feel like it was worthy, and that was just me. So I began practicing on my own machine just to learn how to do it. And I think that's also kind of what gives me the confidence now to try it on the Bernina. So I do like that for that reason. See, okay, I feel validated now. But, you know, it's only for the small projects. There's no way in this world that I would absolutely go back to shoving a twin size full quilt in this throat ever again. There's no way. But again, this just helps me with my hand-eye coordination and my control. And this is something that's easy enough for everyone here to do so that you could get this done. And this is a simple foot that you can use. The question are these sewing gloves? So yes, these are the actual quilting gloves that I use. So these are Fons and Porter. And they were from JoJo's, and they were specifically for quilting. There are other brands that you can buy. But because, you know, I can't find things when I want to, you could get a pair of garden gloves, and they work the same way. And you just have to make sure you don't get something so cheap that, you know, the black rubs off on your fabric. Ask me how I know. But you could do that and use a pair of garden gloves. So I try to give some tips and tricks just because, again, quilting is expensive. And because quilting is expensive, it could be for everybody, but we just may need to find some ways to get around things until possibly we're able to buy the things that we need. So these are much lighter. They're easier to use. You know, the dots do have a much better grip. I don't have to worry about the white dots rubbing off on, you know, to my fabric, or garden gloves over time will get dry rot a little bit, and then you're buying another pair of garden gloves, right? So if you buy so many garden gloves, you might as well buy a pair of these, because we won't discuss how old these are, but these, no, we will. These may be probably 15 years old. I've had these for a while. And so I absolutely, you know, it's always worth the investment to spend the money. But like I said, not everybody has the money. Okay, so I just meandered all around the hair, and you can barely see it because I use black. Right now, I'm thinking I'm just going to leave her face alone. I don't feel like quilting in that area right now. I may go back and change my mind. I haven't thought of anything that I would like. I could echo around her hair. That's just tracing the lines and then coming in. So I could do a little bit of an echo to her face, or I could leave it as is. It's not going to get a lot of wear and tear, so I'm not necessarily worrying about that too much. Okay, so my next area, because I'm staying in the center right now, is to come down around her clothing. Again, I can make some decisions. You make your decisions before you get started. I'm doing the easiest thing for me, but you could decide what you want to do. I could very easily do lines, because that's what's in this fabric. There are tons of lines. Or, and you know, again, we're not using a ruler or anything deep like that. I could echo the lines using my free motion foot. That means I would go as closely as I can around them, taking my time to do it without using a ruler to have accurately straight lines. And again, this is more practice than anything, so I'm not worried about it being perfect. And 9 times out of 10, the people that are going to get it, unless they're a quilter, they don't know if it's perfect themselves. So what I mean by using the lines is I could just go and then turn. And all I'm doing is following the line, and it may not be the straightest. And I'm just turning it and turning it around those lines. And depending on how detailed I want to be, I can go around every single last one. But I just don't want to go too fast, because the faster I go, the more crooked I tend to go. So I want to be careful with that. And then I also put a bobbin in here that wasn't quite full, because I was only going to do the hair. So I have to be mindful of the fact that I might run out of bobbin too. But I just want to share. And that's because I'm doing something much more detailed than if I did a meander in the area. But I do want to show you what this would look like. So I'm just taking my time and going around those lines. Now, I don't have to move it as much, right? Because I could just go, I'm not good. I'm going from side to side, but notice I don't have to switch it. I could just move it because, again, I'm using a free motion foot. I just like the needle in front of me rather than behind me. So that's why I prefer I prefer to twist and turn. And it's what I'm more comfortable with. But I'll show it to you this way too. Okay. And of course, that's when I ran out of that bobbin that I knew I was going to run out of. But I'll show you what this looks like. Okay. Now, bear with me that this is black on black. Let me pull this out because I have too many threads and I can't see. Okay, so we're going to try the black on black. I do have a light on this, right? So you could see the bumps where the stitches would be. Okay, that's the hair. And then what makes it a little bit harder to see, but you can see it. You can see where those stitches are right around her shirt. If I flip this over, you could see it a lot better. So you can see her hair out here for the stitches I did. And you could see where I was doing her shirt here. Okay. Now again, the thread that I'm using back here, you're not going to see this back anyway. Hey, Miss Belinda, you're not going to see this anyway because this is going to be enclosed inside the pillow form. So I'm not worried about what the back looks like in terms of thread. If I were creating a quilt, I would be concerned because then somebody's looking at the front and the back. They're not, looking at just a, plain background. So, it makes a difference what you're using, how you're using the back to determine what makes sense. So if you are not using, okay, I'm gonna do something funky just to show it to you. It doesn't matter what you're using because we're going to put this inside the pillow form. So what does that mean? That if you are a person that has all these threads left over after a project, as long as it doesn't matter how it shows up on the other side, and it won't, I can use a different thread just to get rid of it. I try to clear out my bobbins as much as possible whenever, just because if I'm not using it, it doesn't make sense to keep it. So this one is a little burgundy-ish. Of course, that wouldn't go like it was supposed to. Okay, got it. Okay. And we'll slide this under here again. So we'll try that again. Okay. Bam, bam. Put that there. And we'll slide this back under. Okay. Think about where I stopped, because again, this is black. So because this is black, it's hard for me to see it. I'm going to needle up, needle down, pull up my bobbin thread. Only once, because you can't do it more than once. It won't work on you. Put that needle back down in the bottom position, lower my foot. And then let's go around this. And again, this is all about control until you get better. This is not a race. So it might take you an hour or two to get something done like this, but I'd rather it be done and done fairly decently than to rush. The slower I go, the possibility of my stitches being further apart than if I speed that foot up. So that means my stitches are closer together. So I do want to be careful with how fast I'm going, because it is going to change the length of the stitch. So you want to get a rhythm, and that's what's important with working with this. And I don't have to go around every one, but I just want to create some sort of pattern in there. And again, like I said, I don't like going forward and then back and then side to side. I do like to pivot if I'm going straight, just because my hand-eye coordination isn't the best. And I think I do better when I pivot and turn. But again, this is a pillow. And if I give this to somebody, 9 times out of 10, they won't know that it wasn't supposed to look the way that I had it. They're going to go, oh, you quilted that. This is so cute. Thank you for my pillow. So the only person that may go, girl, your lines aren't straight, is going to be the quilter. And that's the quilter that I wouldn't have given the pillow to anyway, because they could have made their own. Now, if I'm phenomenal at this and give this to a quilter, that's fine. And I don't need to give it to somebody anyway who's going to criticize my work. So really, you don't have to worry about it not being perfect. But again, I'm just taking my time, and I'm just following the lines in this pattern, and you don't have to do this. Hey, Miss Arlene, how are you? Thank you for tapping the screen. We are at 6,000 likes. We're trying to get, what was my goal, 20,000? So thank you for tapping the screen. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for rocking out with me. We are working on Garden Window by Kena Quilt Studio. This was a free applique pattern for signing up for her newsletter, Kena, Kena. I do have the videos on my YTube channel. The link is in my bio for how I went about the applique for this. There are some snippets of it here as well. So you absolutely, can follow along with how I did it. I did blow this up. Oh, I hate that word. I did enlarge this by 200%. I doubled it to make it much bigger because I wanted to work with a bigger area than to work in a smaller area. I'm just getting myself from point A to point B here. Did I not do this one? I didn't go all the way around this one. And I do, even though I don't have to go over every shape, I do want to go over enough of them so that it makes sense. And again, this is just a beginner quilting technique. This is not meant to say, hey, don't use a ruler. Because a ruler would give you a straighter edge. And practicing with those rulers would help. But if you're not a confident quilter and you're not ready for that ruler, this is a great way to get your feet wet until you're able to do what you need to do. So we are trying to make this as beginner friendly as possible because we all started somewhere. Now some people have more practice than others because some people have more time than others. So if you have a lot of time that you can dedicate to quilting a quilt or learning how to quilt a quilt, then you might pick up those skills a lot faster than somebody who doesn't have time. And that's okay. And there are people who in my quilt class who they were like, shoot, let me not say that word. They were like, I'm never quilting, right? Like they did it one time and they were like, nope, not for me. And that was their last time even doing it. So they paid somebody every single time they made a quilt to quilt for them. And that was fine. Because their pockets worked like that. At that time, my pockets didn't work like that. So I couldn't afford to make the number of quilts that I made and have somebody quilt every single last one of them. So absolutely, I had to do something different in order to make sure that my quilts got done. So I had to learn how to do something myself. And I had no complaints from anybody that I made a quilt for with what it looked like, even in its novice and infant stages. But I do want to get better, and that's one of the reasons why I did buy the Bernina Q16, because it allows for me to learn how to do long arming with a long arm machine. I'm taking my thread, I have it in my hand, I'm pulling it, I am going to lower my needle, raise it up one time so that I can pull that bottom, but I can pull the bottom up, the bottom thread, and I just want to pull it up enough that I can snip everything. So now I've cut that off, and I can cut the top off. Because I've stitched a couple times, I can do one of two things. I can either tie these off, or because I stitched a couple times in place, I can just snip them. So there are people who do it this way. Then there are people who take these tails, they'll take a needle. Now it would be nice if I took these tails and cut them to the same length. Now, to know me is to know that I do not like threading needles. I do not like doing a hand anything. So, you know, it's working well for me because you're watching. I can run this way. I can come into my fabric. I'm going in between the fabric and the batting. I'm like right in that batting. So you should not see my needle on this side, and you shouldn't see it on this side. And I'm going to bring it up over here. So it went in here, it went out here. So the thread is right running in between the top and the backing, right along that batting. And this is called burying your threads. So now I can clip it. So my thread is buried in here, and it will keep it from unraveling. So you could either darn a couple times with the needle in the same place and just snip it. But that's all. Every time you want your bobbin and your thread up top. So we do want to pull the bobbin up. And then you could just snip it off. Or if you want to, you can, and I darn before I started, so then I could just bury it. If I didn't do that, I would tie it off, and then I would bury the thread. So either way, that would work. Okay, so just so you can see the wonkiness of my lines, here are my lines on the back. So obviously, if I use the straight edge, these lines would be straighter. Again, nobody's going to see this. You can see the hair, so you start to see the image appear, right? But if I flip this back over, you couldn't even tell that I did all that, right? Because you can't see it. So it's quilted, but you can't see everything because that black thread worked. And remember, I got the burgundy out of the vault, and I used it, and you can't even tell that I used burgundy. So the only way you can see I use burgundy is by flipping this over on the back. And again, the only time that you're going to see the inside of that is when you take this pillow off the pillow form and you use it and you wash it. Okay, so I don't need this burgundy anymore. I will put this over here, and I'm going to go to the white thread because the background is white. So I need to switch out the bobbin, and I need to switch out the top thread. And my table is hitting my iPad. I'm so sorry. Click. There we go. Let me do this the right way. Pull the thread through that way. Do I want to use? No, I don't want to use that. I'm going to stick with what I know. Let's practice offline when you're not experimenting to see if that thread works, because what I don't want is for it to continue to break. Thank you. Okay. So again, we're working on garden window. I made the block itself last week on live. I worked on it on Saturday. My goal was to get on this Saturday, and then I remembered I had an event. And so I will be out, and right now I have nothing to wear. So tomorrow I will be thinking about something to wear. I'm going to wear something I have. So I haven't decided what is going to come out the vault yet for me to wear. Now you may be asking, and yes, there is a contraption on here to thread the needle, but I'm an old school threader, and it just, something about threading a needle the normal way that I just love. So I just thread it the normal way. You do not have to, and if you don't have a needle threader on your machine, that was not me licking the thread and trying to get it through. If you use your snips and cut the edge of the thread or any scissors, you'll get a nice crisp edge, and then you can just put it right through the eye of the needle. Okay. So here we go. So there's a lot of space right in here that we need to work with. So we needed, again, to figure out what this pattern was going to be. You needed to decide scale. Do you want it big? Do you want it small? I don't know if you can see this as well. I'm trying to look on my other machine. You can see it down here, down bottom. There is a pattern on here. And it is straight line. I'm not mimicking it, but I'm just pointing something out. This is a white on white print. So you could see the pattern, and I could follow that some sort of way. We're not doing that, but I'm just saying you could. So you would make that decision on what you want that to look like. I am not doing that. So I am going to do my own pattern design that I want to do. I'm not using the one that follows this. Remember, I did follow something similar here, but I'm not doing anything that little here. Again, it's totally up to you for scale. If you want to go with a big set of loops or meanders or pebbles or whatever you're using, or whether you want to use small. Just understand that if you go small, you're going to be quilting longer. That's my philosophy. And if I'm not here to want to be here forever to work on something, especially a pillow, I don't necessarily think that I need that much time for this, but if I did, then I could absolutely do a really tiny thing. So like a tiny thing might be pebbling all around this. We're not doing all that. Okay. So I'm going to hold this. I knotted. Remember, that was that little knotting that we did in the beginning. We're just letting the needle go up and down. Both my bobbin and my top thread are up top. And I'm going to do like a little petal, right? Then I'm going to echo that petal. And then I can echo that petal again. Okay, and it's a little off, so I am much wider on this. But again, that's what practice is for. I can do a swirl. Okay, so, and then I can echo the swirl. And then I can create another swirl. Now I try as much as possible not to cross. So I want to come up in this neck while I can. And then I can work my way out around that swirl and continue to echo around the swirl and around the petal. Okay, and you can kind of see that design starting to form. I can come on the other side of that petal and I can do another swirl. don't want to leave a lot of thick white space by itself. So I am mindful of that. And again, the more pressure I put on the foot, the smaller my stitches will be together. And I'm trying to be mindful of that as well. I'm going to work my way out of that little corner. I can add a little swirl just to get out that corner. So my thought was, here in my neck of the woods, as I'm looking out onto my garden, it has been very windy. So these swirls for me can represent the wind. And I'm just echoing around the swirl. Okay. And again, the smaller I am, the longer it takes for me to do this. You want to leave yourself enough room to get back out of your corner. I'm going to echo back around. Come back. Echo around. Okay. I can swirl, 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 echo, echo, echo. Okay, thank you, thank you, thank you. We are almost at 10,000 likes. Thank you so much. I can echo around her hair and then get to a place to do a swirl. Swirl back out. Whoops. And from time to time, I will do this to myself with my machine. If my stitches are too wide, they will get caught up in the foot. Okay, maybe we'll get that one. Oops. Got it. Okay, that little dastardly puzzle piece came up. Okay. Now this one is going to go into my blocks. If I'm not careful, I got it. Now I can do another petal. Echo out. These lines don't have to be curvy, they can be straight. I just find that with curves and swirls, they're more forgiving than straight lines. So I just feel like I can get away with a lot more error when I do curves. But again, my thought is that I'm mimicking the wind. I am so happy that the wind has stopped blowing the way that it has, because I was feeling like, as I was sitting there singing Defying Gravity, that sooner or later there would be things flying all around the city, as everything was defying gravity from all that wind that was blowing lately. And again, this is my domestic machine. This is not my long arm. The only thing, and this is a small project, the bigger the throat, the bigger the quilt. With ease, because you can absolutely do a big quilt with a small throat. Just understand it is going to require some work. And so if you're up for the challenge, I know I was, and that's why I got done. And then you can understand even now, if you've been rocking out with me for a little bit, why long arming is so expensive. And this is the novice doing it. Thank you for 10K likes. This is the novice doing it. This is not the expert long armor quilter doing it. And if this person is taking their time to go around this, they're using a lot of thread at this point. And it's taking them a lot of man hours to get all the way around the quilt. A lot of people who are long armors have invested in digital machines where the machine will do the long arming for you. That is an expensive car payment. So if that's their business, that makes sense, because I'm going to get the money back when I start quilting for other people. If it's just something that you do as a hobby, you may not want to spend that kind of money on a long arm machine that will cost that much. And that's one of the reasons why I have a sitting long arm. I mean, I could have fit the table in there and it wouldn't have been that much more, but I also didn't have the space to do that. So rather than having something that I couldn't take apart, I'm able to take my table apart, store it, and so I prefer to get a sitting long arm for that reason. But you can absolutely get one that has a frame. You could get a small frame if you have the space in your house. And you could do the same thing with a long arm, but this time you're driving it and you're moving the machine rather than moving the fabric. And it's a little easier, I might add, to move the machine than it is to move the fabric. When I try them out at quilt shows, I'm like, oh, this is so easy. But again, it depends on your space. Sometimes your finances. And so I always say get what you can afford. And get what you afford can be, you know, hey, I can figure this out over time. I can Uber, do DoorDash, and I can get this machine, but I can't get this one. So you might not get the lowest end, but you know, you want to get what makes sense. So that's one of the reasons why I like quilt shops and quilt shows, because you get a chance to test drive the machine and determine if this is the machine for you. So I did go to quite a few quilt shows. I tried out that Bernina 50 billion 11 times until I was convinced that it was the Bernina that I wanted, and it was the Bernina I was going to get. And I want it, and I got it. Okay. One of the other reasons why I like doing smaller projects, especially scrappier projects, in addition to the fact that it's okay for me to jack it up, and it's a beginner project or it is a scrappy project, is that it's usually on a smaller scale, which means that I'm not going to be here a long trying to get something done. I do know that when I am on social media, it makes a difference for people to be able to see the process. But if I'm working on a big quilt, it's going to take a couple hours possibly to do. And traditionally, what I might do is start it, stop it, start it again, and so it doesn't lend itself to me doing a whole quilt live. So I prefer to do smaller quilts, and then that way I know I have enough time to show a process, to talk about my thought, my thinking, and then to come back and then, you know, you to see a final project. Okay, so then we're going to come up. Remember, we pull the bobbin thread up. And I am saying bobbin, even though it could also be considered bottom, right? Because this is the bottom thread. But I am pulling the bobbin up from the bottom. Okay. And then once I pull this up from the bottom, I just want to get enough of it. And I did do my tacking stitch. I can just clip, clip. Take off that extra. And I started here. I tacked down here, so I can just clip. Okay. So I'm going to slide this back for a second. And I'm going to slide the iPad back. Turn my body away from my machine just so you can see this. Oops. You know, when I move stuff, then the stuff gets unangled. Okay. And I think I need to lift this up. Ugh. Sorry for the trip around the world. I'm trying to get that done. Okay. Good. Okay. So, here is, and you can see the quilting. Okay. So, because it's the wind and the wind is gushing, in my mind, everything doesn't have to be the same size. So you can see where I did like those little petal effects. Almost looks like somebody's blowing the wind. So I didn't use a lot of petals. I used petals in certain places. And then I used the swirls. So the swirls are just going all the way and throughout. If I turn this over on the back, you can see what the back looks like. Again, this is not, this could be, right? And let's just talk about that for a second. This could be the back. This could be what everybody sees. Because it's the back. And it's not terrible. It looks like scribbles, but it's not terrible. So I can absolutely see that this looks like a female or somebody with a lot of hair. I can see that that's her shoulders, and I can see the design that's going all the way around this. So I absolutely could have, if I hadn't planned it, I could have left this as is. I did not have to decide that I did not want this to be seen. But I don't like to, this is a scrap piece of fabric, like muslin, so it's very thin. I use this because I don't necessarily like the batting on my throat plate, just because it gets real linty, and I didn't want that extra lint in there. So I'll use a piece of scrap fabric as the backing just to mimic the quilt sandwich, knowing that nobody's going to see this side. But I do love how this came out on the back, but it's the front for me, right? So this is the front. The only thing that I haven't quilted is up here. I don't have to quilt out here. This is going to be the edge for the pillow, so I don't have to quilt it if I don't want to. If I do, again, remember, like down here, you're not really going to see the stitches, so I don't have to do anything elaborate. I could just do lines and get through it with the lines. So I don't have to do anything difficult. So if I feel like it's going to shift, or if I'm using a batting that may cause me some issues, I can absolutely stitch in the ditch to get that done. So again, totally up to you. I wouldn't use, thank you. I wouldn't use white. So then that means that I need to cut that thread, because I'm not using white to go around those darker colors. Even though they have white in them, I don't like how the white is going to show up. Thank you for the follow. I appreciate you. I'm not going to go around that with white. I would prefer to go around that with a darker color. So then that means that I would switch back to the black. Now, my question is, you know, because I've been janky, right? When I was going around with it, and why don't I see what I need to see? Okay. When I was going around with it, remember, I was using some leftover brown, which I still have. My mouth is so dry. So I can place that brown back in there and use that brown to finish this out. Thank you for so much for the daily heart me. Thank you. Hey, B. Chantel, how are you doing, love? I said, okay, my girl out there, she out there doing her thing, making 50 bazillion bags. I was like, okay, I see you making all them shamir bags. I was like, I got two. I was done. I was over it. And not because there's anything wrong with the pattern, but because I'm not a bag girl like that. Give me one good bag. I don't care if that bag doesn't match anything else in my wardrobe. I got a bag. Look. I said, then she put out her little pink bodice. I see, I'll be knowing. Okay, let me just show this to you for a second while I have it up. So here's the spring foot. So this is the foot that I was using for the free motion. Hey, Miss Sabs. And so it has a spring. So that's part of the reason why some people will call it a spring foot. We use it to do free motion sewing. So that's why people will say it's a free motion foot. So free motion foot, spring foot. If you're quilting, this is usually, like, they call it a quilting foot, but let's be clear that you also use this, the walking foot, to quilt. Let's be clear, you can also use, some people will call it a darning foot, or they will call it a ruler foot. So they'll use this for quilting. So it just depends on what you're using and who you're talking to. So a good quilt store who's helping you to purchase it, they usually don't sell the feet, because unless it's like a brand to them. So if they're a Janome dealer, they may have Janome feet. If they are a Bernina dealer, they may have Bernina feet. But if you have an Elna, then unless those feet are interchangeable on like unless the Bernina feet fit the Elna or something like that, then you would have to buy those feet from somewhere like Sewing Parts Online. And what you would want to do is go somewhere where somebody can tell you what kind of foot to buy. And then you would just go ahead to Sewing Parts Online and purchase the foot. Now, Sewing Parts Online should tell you what kind of foot to buy for what kind of machine. They do have a pull-down menu that you can say, hey, I have a Elna, you know, and for the most part, most of the feet are the same. But if they're not, you'll say the brand of Elna you have, and then they will tell you what kind of foot to buy if there is a foot to buy. Be careful that if it is not the manufacturer's foot, sometimes the foot will not fit as perfectly as you would like it to fit. So that is a just a disclaimer. I had to feed dogs down. Feed dogs must be down with this one. The feed dogs do not have to be down with the walking foot. You want the feed dogs up because you're using, in theory, two sets of feed dogs. The walking foot has a feed dog, and the machine itself has feed dogs. So there's two sets of feed dogs, one on top, one on the bottom. That's what helps to move those layers through, so that when you're quilting, it gives a more even look. And the key word there is should. That's the word that I use. That's like the word of the year with my students. Should. So it should do it. And that doesn't mean it will, because there are some other factors that may prohibit it from doing what it needs to do, but it should feed through evenly. And if you haven't done some other things to prepare it, it might not do that. Because the feed dogs are feeding this through, then I can just allow the machine to do the work. This is raw edge applique for this. We stitched this together last Saturday. So we started this last Saturday, and this will be completed today, or tonight. So, oops, I didn't mean to do that. I didn't mean to start on the inside of the edge. I meant to start on the edge. Okay. So I line the foot up with the batting because I don't have to. I'm going to cut that excess off. And because the feed dogs are working, I don't have to use my gloves. The machine is doing the work. And it is all I'm doing is using my hand to make sure that the fabric stays still. Okay, I can roll this up just a little bit just to get that out of the way because the throat is only but so wide. I'm going to lift my needle up, slide that over a little bit. I'm lining it up with the edges of the foot. I could do this a different way, but why work smarter when I can work lazier? And all I'm doing is just adding some lines because I want this to stay in place. And I just don't want it to shift. You're not even really even going to see these lines, so it's not even going to matter. Okay. Oh, I'm at 13,000. Thank you. This is probably... This is no bigger right now than about 19 inches right now. It's about 19 inches square. The pattern that this is from Kena Quilt Studio. It is an applique pattern. And the only part of the pattern that she provides is the applique. And she gives you the directions for how to do applique, what types of materials you would need. She gives you all that information. So she's not telling you how to finish it. She's just telling you how to do the applique part. And that makes sense because if you're not buying the pattern, I don't need to give you a whole pattern necessarily. And if I'm teaching you a skill, then I'm just going to focus on that skill. I ain't mad at it. And it was enough for what I needed to do because I had enough experience with doing something similar to this that I could either dig in my stash to find something that works, or I could make it up. And in this case, I just use my scraps to make it up. And so this is applique. Okay. And then if I want, I can go along the edge of this. And that just holds it down. If you are sending this to a long armor, you wouldn't do this on your own batting. They would do it. But one of the things that the long armor would ask you to do is to stitch all around your quilt so that those little corners for the border don't pop up while they're trying to quilt for you. And I'll show you, just so that, I'm not being delirious right now. All of these lines right here are pieces of squares. And so sometimes when you're quilting, they lift up and they separate because you've cut them off. You didn't backstitch this. So because of that, while it was before, because you don't do the backing and the batting, they do it. All you're doing is, sending them the quilt top, you would have stitched all the way around that. Now, I wasn't sending it to anybody, so I didn't stitch around it. So that's why I'm making sure that I do that last edge, just so that I don't run into any problems later. And it's about 1/8 to about 1/16 of an inch that I'm working with. So I'm not, worried about that coming undone. Okay. And again, I'll come back. And I have other tools that go with this that will allow me to get this line even straighter. But again, nobody's going to see how not straight this line is, so I'm not worried about it. So I do sew clothing as well. The fabric that is in this scrappy quilt represents just about well, not every, but it represents a lot of the dresses and skirts. And I don't think any jacket fabric is in here that I have made. So I take my clothing scraps and I can turn them into quilts. Usually we're talking cotton. This is ooh, okay, that thread broke. We're talking Ankara. I'm glad it broke on the end too. We're talking Ankara, so Ankara is cotton, and that will allow me to do quilts with no problem. So if you're using knits, not so much. If you're using denim, you could do it. You really, if like silks, you could do it. You really don't want to use a fabric that stretches just because it will drive you bananas. It can be done. I suggest using a stabilizer if you do, even though there are plenty of people who don't. So an example of that would be making a t-shirt quilt. So there are a lot of places out here that make t-shirt quilts, and they sell them at all different price points. And one of the reasons why one company can sell it as cheaply as they do is because all they're doing is cutting your t-shirts out into squares, probably like 12-inch to 15-inch squares. Then they're using a serger, it looks like, to serge everything together. And then they're backing it with fleece. And then that's it. So they're not doing any quilting per se. They're creating a t-shirt blanket, if you ask me, because they're not doing this on the t-shirt quilt. If you get a quilter to do a t-shirt quilt, then if this were a t-shirt, this white area in here with this lady on here, we are probably bordering it. We are putting some kind of stabilizer on it. And then we're stitching it together and then doing some sort of quilting. So it's going to cost more money. But, either way would be fine. I am a beginner sewer, and I mostly want to do thrift tips. But I'm a bit overwhelmed. How did I learn? So a combination of things. My favorite one, right? Because if we're thrifty, is YouTube University. My favorite people to follow, or person to follow, or group to follow was Missouri Star Quilt Company. If you go onto their YTube site and you look them up, Missouri Star Quilt Company, and that's Jenny Doan. And if you look her up, she shows you how to make really simple and easy quilts. So she is a great way to get started. There's a lot of inspiration on the page, and you know, that helped me with some things. That's one. I also had a quilt shop. It was a local quilt shop, not as thrifty, that I went to, and I tell people I'm cheap. You wouldn't believe I was cheap with all the fabric that I buy and all the machines that I have, but I am cheap. I don't even call it thrifty, I call it cheap. So if I can help it and I don't have to spend my money on things, I won't. So when my local quilt shop decided to have classes, I first took a regular quilt shop class and I learned how to make a quilted bag. That one cost me $90. I think it included the pattern, but it didn't include the material. So, yeah. And a class is worthy of a class. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that people shouldn't charge a lot of money for a class, because they're doing the work. And people deserve to get paid for their time. Everybody just can't afford it. And so because of that, we make decisions, and that's okay. So if I can't afford it, I don't take the class. There's somebody else that can take it. And you're going to get less people. So you might have 6 people in the class at $90 each. And so you'll make a good little profit. And there's some overhead and things that you have to pay, but you'll get a good little profit out of making that class. Now, depending on the people that are in the class, it might not be worth it, because you might have 85 billion gray hairs by the time they leave, because they don't understand what it means to sew in a straight line. They don't understand how to read a pattern the way that you need them to make a pattern. Like, it is what it is. So what I do is like I said, you know, for me, it's like, that's not the thing, but I did take classes at these quilt shops, and they were not cheap, but I loved them because I learned techniques one-on-one with people. So I absolutely agree, and I am wholehearted that sometimes in person is best. But if I don't have it, and that's fine, like I said, following people like Missouri Star Quilt Company, Angela Waters was one of my favorite. Walters. I loved her because she kept me entertained. She was called the Midnight Quilter. I forget what she's called now, but she was the Midnight Quilter, and she would get on after the kids went to bed at night, and she would work on a quilt, and she would teach you how she long-armed the quilt on her domestic machine, similar to what I'm doing now. And so she did that for years, and I used to love watching her. So I find people who are pleasing to listen to, because I can't listen to everybody, who are pleasing to listen to, and who make it simple enough for me to follow. I may need to see it 6 times before I understand it. So I need to be able to go back, and if I can watch you one time and get it, I don't care how irritating your voice is. If I have to watch you over and over again, I can. So you have to find that person, but like I said, YouTube is the best place to go to get that, because you can absolutely find a bunch of people on there who will show you how to do different things. When I first started quilting, we didn't have the resources online that we have now, so you can absolutely go to different websites, and they will have either videos and or step-by-step tutorials that you can use. That was another way that I did it over time. But what we did was, in 2010, about 2010 to 2012, I was on the Book of Faces, and there was a group there were a couple groups. One was called JUQ, Just Us Quilters. And we would get on there, and there wasn't a lot of video back then. We just had pictures, but we would share tips and tricks for how to make quilt blocks. And then we would do like quilt block exchanges. And everybody would, share their quilt blocks out with each other. And so I have quilt blocks from all over the country, from different quilters, and I absolutely adore them. And I am finishing up some of those projects over the next couple weeks because it is pitiful that I still have those blocks from 2010, 2011, 2012, and I've done nothing with them. Some of those blocks I have done some things with, and some of them I haven't, so I need to work on those. But I learned how, because of the block exchange, we practiced working on the blocks. So you started with like a simple rail fence, I'll say, and that's not what we exchanged, but I'll just use that example. You started with that and you practiced it. So you may have had the first sloppy copies for yourself, and then you sent out the better copies for everybody else. And then you decided how many blocks you wanted to make. So you could make 10 blocks, you could make 6 blocks, like they gave you the increments for, you know, how many blocks people could do. So you absolutely, you know, would work with that. Did I run out of my burgundy already on the end? Yep. Okay, so I'm out of my burgundy. I'll go to my next color because, like I said, I'm using up thread. So it was just a great way to, why do I not see? Oh, because it's behind me. So it was a great way to learn how to do the blocks because it was the same repetitive thing over and over and over again. So I absolutely also agree with Teresa. It's also trial and error. And so, you know, I think that because of videos and things like that, things have gotten easier. And if somebody's going to give you a tip, like, for example, it's important to square up your blocks. It's important to use starch. Those are things that you may want to try when you're doing it because it didn't make sense at the time when I didn't have the videos and I didn't have somebody to show me what it looked like, but it makes sense now. When those blocks are jagged and ragged, it's a complete difference from when you square it up. It's a complete difference when you starch it versus not starching it. Ooh, we are almost at 20K. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I got one more row to go. I have this one side to do. So all I'm doing right now, again, is just taking my walking foot and I'm just stitching some lines down just to hold these edges down. The walking foot is doing all the work. All my hands are doing is just making sure that the fabric doesn't curve and look wonky, even though it does already, just because, you know, my hands aren't steady, but I'm okay with that. Because again, to most people, when they look, thank you for the gift. When most people look, they're not going to know that, you know, your stuff was off unless you're sitting there saying, you know, it's a little crooked and I made a couple mistakes and I hope you like it anyway. Like, you know, our insecurities get the best of us when we're doing stuff. And I mean, to be honest, and I'm not talking about anybody else's work, but I am. I go on to Etsy because I have insecurities about my work. And I see something on Etsy, and I'm like, well, I could have did that. And again, not to insult anybody else, right? But just to say that I'm being so insecure, and somebody is buying this work that I'm thinking isn't the best, but it isn't the best for who? So my friends and family, I make them a quilt. It's like, thank you. They're happy. They standing in line. They're still trying to figure out why they don't have one yet. And I'm sitting up here second guessing my ability. So, you know, you get started, you try it. You might mess up the first couple ones. I would not use my good fabric, just like making a muslin for a outfit. I would not use my good fabric. I'm not going out to the quilt shop and spending 10 to 12 a yard to practice. I might go to Walmart and get it for 2 to 3. You know, and there's nothing wrong with Walmart fabric. I'm just saying that if you see something in those other stores, those aren't the places that I'm going to spend a whole lot of money and then mess up. Because then that's disheartening. Because you've now spent $100 on fabric and then turned around and made a mess. And now you're like, okay, this hobby is over. Because I don't have that to spend every time I mess up. And real rap, I don't have that to spend for $30. But if I have to lose it, I'd rather lose 30 than 100. Okay. So if I look on the back, you can see where I nested. And that's just, it's not nested from what I did. But I'm not worried about it with that nest. If I was, I'd pick it out, but I'm not worried about it because nobody is going to necessarily see the inside of it. But you can see the quilting. Again, just for purpose, right? The lines appear straight, even though they're not straighty straight. But on the front, you wouldn't even be able to tell. So if I'm doubting my quilting, I'm sticking with colors that blend into the fabric rather than stand out. That's why I wouldn't use white. Because if I use white, you would see those lines. If I use gray or my favorite color is old gold, if I use that, you would see them. Okay. So then we're going to take our ruler. I have extra, you always do extra batting and backing. The quilt top is inside of those. And we're going to line the ruler up. If this is done correctly, even though sometimes it can be wonky, these were 2.5-inch blocks. And I stitched this to the white part, which means that it was a 1/4-inch seam. So this should just about be at 2 1/4. So if I line this up, it should, keyword is should, because sometimes when you know, like when you're driving on the highway, you think you're going straight and you veer off to the right or you veer off to the left. It happens. It happens with sewing too. So I'm going to line it up with the line and I'm just going to cut across. This is going to go in my scrap bin. If there are places where it's a little off, I'm not worried about that because the binding is going to catch it and it's going to catch it within a 1/4 inch. I'll turn this sideways. I'm going to line up the edge with one of the lines on the ruler, or I could use the edge of the ruler. I just find it's easier to use a line. And again, I should be able to get it at about 2 1/4. I make sure everything is lined up the way I need it to. Measure twice, cut once. So make sure everything is the way it's supposed to be, and then cut. That's going to go in my scrap pile. And I'm going to turn it again. Again, this should be at about 2 1/4. I line everything up to make sure everything is nice and even. I'm checking more than once because if I mess up, it's too bad. So I don't want to mess up. I want to get it as perfect as I can the first time. Remember, when I add the binding is going to capture some of that edge, so I'm not worried that you can see some of it. I would be concerned if you could see a lot of it. Again, I'm using my 1/4, 2 1/4, lining everything up. I do see a little bit of an issue, but I should be able to capture that. And I cut. Of course, I drop everything on the floor. Okay, and I'll show you where it is. I'm going to have to be really careful when I get to that edge, or I could trim it a little bit more Nope, I got 20,000. Thank you. At 20,000 likes. Woohoo! So right here, you can see where it's a little off. If it bothers me that much, then I can see if I need to get rid of that. If I can't, if it's not within the 1/4 inch and it's close. But what I do before I do that is I fold this in half and I try to see if these ends meet on both sides. Because if they don't, my measurements were off somewhere and I need to fix it. Woohoo! 2 ends meet. And then let's turn it this way and see if the same thing happens. And they do. If they're off about a 1/16 of an inch, oh, I'm not worried about that. But if they're off like a lot, then you're going to have to trim up a little bit more because, yeah, you don't want that. You don't want that to mess you up if you are doing a quilt, because you want it to be as square as possible. Now, one of the things for a quilter that I follow that I was like, yeah, he got a point. He said, look, if it's like a little off, a 1/4 inch or whatever, nobody is sitting there folding the quilt. Hey, Joshy, nobody is sitting there folding the quilt and saying, ooh, the edges don't line up completely. They're going to fold it like this and nobody cares. So even though mine lined up, who cared what it looked like, because this is how they're folding it. So as long as it's not completely off and wavy or anything else like that, nobody's concerned. So here is the final part for the front of my pillow. Because I just reminded myself that I'm doing a pillow, not a binding, then I don't really care about this because I'm going to do a 1/2 inch seam all the way around. That means I'm going to capture that. So I'm not even worried about that. If I were doing a 1/4 inch, it would make a difference. I do want to measure this. So this measures 19 inches. That was a question that somebody asked me before. How big was the block? This block is 19 inches. And it's 19 inches square. So all the way around, the block is 19 inches square. This is the inside of it. But remember, I'm making a pillow. So I'm going to make a pillow form. When I make the pillow form, I am going to lose a 1/2 inch on each side. So since I'm losing a 1/2 inch on each side, and this is 19 inches square, the final pillow will be about 18 inches square. So if I need to buy a pillow form, I need to buy an 18-inch pillow form, or I could make an 18-inch pillow form. Totally up to you. The more pillow form you get and the more fluff you get, the fluffier the pillow. But that's what I can do. What I just need to do now is decide what my back is going to look like and how I'm going to do that. I can do one of two things depending on where you are in your quilting journey. I can do a couple things. So first of all, I can use this scrap piece of fabric if I wanted to. And I'm not going to do that because I told you why I don't like doing that. But I could take a scrap piece of fabric, cut this scrap to 19 inches, stitch all the way around, leave an opening, stuff it, hand stitch the opening, and just have this as a pillow, and we don't take the pillow form out. And I would be done. Or I can have extra fabric, like an inch, that I would start with. I would cut this in half. I would sew a zipper on this. And then I could attach this to this with the right measurements because it'll be 19-inch square. I would stitch around it all the way around because I have the zipper in the center, and I can go all the way around this, and then I could just open it up, flip it inside out, and just put the pillow form in it with the zipper. The zipper would have to be less than 19 inches because you don't necessarily want it to go from edge to edge. So I might use a 14-inch zipper. So that's totally up to you. Or you could create an envelope. So that would be 2 pieces of fabric. that are going to overlap. And they're going to overlap more than this, but this is just as an example, just to show you. I would have 2 pieces of fabric. And remember, this is scrappy. So because this is scrappy, I don't care what I'm using on the back, because the whole thing is scrappy. There's nothing on here that completely matches all the way through. Good night. So I would have an overlap of about maybe 6 inches. And I would take 19 divided by 2 is 9.5. So I might make these about 13 inches wide, each one, so that they overlap. I would cheat, right? Because if I had edges like this, I'm not going to do any sort of hem, because this isn't going to fray. It's a selvage. That would be me. But you could do that. And then make an envelope, and then you push your pillow form in this way. And then that way you don't have to worry about zipper. So it's totally up to you which way you want the pillow to go. So again, if I'm thinking that I'm going to give this as a gift to someone, then I may not care that they switch in and out the pillow forms, because knowing my friends, they probably only have that one pillow form. So I can take my scrap fabric and cut this out to 19 inches square. I do not have a 20-inch square ruler. They exist, but yeah, I'm not doing that. So I can cut this to be 19 and then use this, and we can close this up, other than the fact that all my stuffing is downstairs. But I'll show you this, and then I'll just go downstairs and show it, and then show the video at the end of the final product. Plus, nobody wants to sit here and watch me cut out stuff of pillow. Okay, so I need to make sure that this is 20 or at least 19, and it is. Let me turn it this way so I can see what I'm doing. I am using my mat to cut, and this is 20 here. So I have, oh no I don't. Let me move that over. I have it, but this is 19 here. So I have just enough fabric, which is good, because again, I am using scraps. And the whole goal is not to go into my stash. That's my goal. My goal is to use up my scraps. I do not believe in throwing away fabric if I don't have to. So I'm going to cut this way and get my 19, because my pillow top or that beautiful quilted piece that I did is 19. Then I'll start here. So I go 20 to 10. And I will cut this, 20 to 9.5. So we'll line everything up. Okay. This is throwing me off because there's a 1/2 inch on this. It is not allowing me to set up straightly because my eyes are playing tricks on me. Okay. I'm sitting here saying to myself, this doesn't look right. This doesn't look right. And that's why it doesn't look right, because it's not, so, and again, measure twice. So I gotta make sure that it's right, because I only get one shot with this fabric if I cut it too short. Okay. So here we go. Okay. So again, I can use clips. And we're just going to clip. And what this does is it helps this to stay in place. So while there is a school of thought that you don't have to clip, and you don't have to pin. I do like to do that from time to time because it will result in less waving. And I don't know why this looks like it's a little bit bigger. So somewhere I did something that I shouldn't have done. I don't know. But that's okay. We're going to make this work. And I want to get up here. And I'm going to clip for the opening. You don't leave it open in the corners because it's too hard to turn it and get a good corner. Because I'm not going to use the table, I'm going to reattach this just so that I have a little bit more surface. It doesn't matter if I use my walking foot through this. It's a lot of layers, so I'll just go ahead and do it to finish this and close this off. Am I doing a 1/4 inch? Nope. Okay. Back stitch, because you are turning this and because you are stuffing this, you want to make sure that you reinforce that opening so that it doesn't come undone. I'm going to stop a 1/2 inch from the edge and pivot and turn. And you'll see, if you've been here with me during the beginning, it's a lot harder. Even though I'm not, again, I'm not pulling my fabric, but it's a lot harder without that table on the edge for this hand. So that table really helps to keep my hand steady and to help me to keep the fabric steady. And again, I'm not pulling, so even as you see my hand moving, you don't pull. And part of the pull is you mess up, you'll throw the timing off on the machine sometimes. You could break a needle. The feed dogs are there to do their job. Let the feed dogs do their job. And their job is to move the fabric. So let them move their fabric the way that they need to. Your hand is just there to guide the fabric. It is not there to move the fabric up. And I'm almost at that corner. Right back to that beginning. I hate hand stitching. I try to get this as close as possible because I don't like the hand stitch. But I do find that the pillows sometimes are so heavy that I can't hand stitch the way that I want to. That I can't do it by machine. Your corners are there. You do want to make sure that you trim those out just because they will bunch up in the corner when you turn it. So you want to cut around that corner just to shave a little bit off. Looks like that. Do the same thing in all corners. That's one of the reasons why you want to make sure that you stop mid pillow, not in the corners, because you need those corners to corner. It's 2 down, 2 more to go, and then we're done. And this is taking a terrible toll because I'm being too lazy to get my sewing scissors that would cut this fabric a lot better. And actually, I don't even have to do that. Why am I torturing myself? I can use my rotary cutter and cut in. Because it would be too much like right to look for the sewing scissors. Okay, we'll be cleaning up tomorrow. Okay, we are not cleaning up tonight. I had plenty of chopsticks. Come in, and I'm going to pull this out. Thank you so much for joining the team. Thank you, thank you, thank you for the likes. Thank you, thank you, thank you for the gifts. Thank you for following me and for rocking out, because we are almost done. It's going to take me about another couple minutes to do what I need to do, and then I am out. And I will be getting up regular time to do boot camp because the sister is not waking up early tomorrow. So I am kind of pushing in all of my corners now. Just a little bit. I'll push them in a little bit more, but I like to push as many in as I possibly can, just because once I start the process, sometimes it's hard to get in there, and so it's easier to push them in the beginning and then pull everything through and then finish it off if I have to. Okay, so we're gonna birth it. Okay, and again, I'm not stuffing this today, especially because if I go down there and use the scraps, and I'm just using my chopstick, and I like the chopstick because it has a blunt end, so I'm not going to poke the mess out of my finger, and I'm not going to poke a hole in my fabric. These are plastic, so it's a little harder to break them. Okay, and we're just going to push those corners out. There we go. And we'll get this last one. Okay. And here we go. And so everything is together. I'll give it one good press. You'll see that there are no edges where that batting was hanging out. It's all encased there. This is the only opening. I will put in all my fluff in here, and the pillow will be done. So this will be a cute pillow to put somewhere in somebody's office in a chair. It could sit somewhere in my house, wherever I want it to be. So the garden window pillow is finally finished.